Hello everybody and welcome back to another Wainrider Wednesday, the weekly series where we look at progress for the upcoming mod for Rome Total War's Alexander expansion, Total War Wainriders. This is a mod set in Middle-earth well before the events of the War of the Ring, and in this one we're going to look at a couple of very important building types that will exist in all of your settlements. And now, before we really get into this, I do want to point out that the information I'm about to share has come over the course of some discussions with Eridan. Now, many of you who have been playing 4th Age Total War and other mods by the same team will, of course, know who Eridan is. For those of you who don't, let me just say that he has been involved with modding Rome Total War for a very long time indeed, and has been involved or lead on mods that you may have heard of, such as 4th Age Total War, various incarnations of that mod. He was involved with starting, I believe, in the New Shadow way back in around 2006 or so. He also did work on Viking Invasion 2, Norman Invasion, and probably a bunch of other things. I'm not sure of his entire catalog, to be honest, but he has done a lot of work for the Rome Total War modding community. And so, of course, it's wonderful to have him working with us on Wainriders. I do want to just take a moment here to point out that, so much about this mod started with a very, very small scale vision on my part when I thought this was something that I would just do in my spare time, sort of on my own as a solo project. And then, of course, as these very talented people got involved, it became much more than I could have ever imagined on my own. So I do want to give a thanks to all of the team members for that. But this video today, because we're focusing on those building mechanics, is something that Eridan, of course, is very deeply involved in. So I'm going to try to do it justice here. Hopefully I get it right. Do let me know, Eridan, in the comments or on the Discord where I happen to screw up. But anyway, let's get into it. Now, these two building types will differ from many others in that in most cases, you will not really be interacting with them in terms of upgrading them, destroying them, things like that. These buildings will be present, and for the most part, they are there to provide the player information and to sort of set the stage for important things that are happening in the provinces all across the map. These two building types are the settlement type, which is always going to occupy this first slot in the building panel, and the population type building, which is going to always occupy that second slot in the building panel. Now, before we go any further here, I want to offer the usual caveats that what you are about to see, what you do see in this video, should be considered a work in progress. We're still developing these buildings, adding text, adding clarifications, and in several cases, some of the text you're going to see on screen is really just a placeholder, giving us some idea of the concept we're going to use. We haven't quite settled maybe on the final names for these things yet. So we'll start with the settlement type building. In Wainriders, settlements will come in one of three flavors, essentially. The vast majority of settlements on the map will be basic settlements. That is, they are cities. They work more or less as you would expect them to work in any mod based on Rome Total War. These are the places where you can build your buildings, train your troops, build your economy stuff, train agents, do all the things you can expect. And in Wainriders, we're just calling these settlements currently for just a sort of an all-purpose term that can cover everything from a tiny village in Rovanian somewhere to Minas Honor itself. In addition to settlements, however, we also have permanent forts. These are indicated in this building slot as forts. So if we click on Caer Andros here, we can see that it is called a fort. There are also several more up along the upper Anduin. There are some other forts scattered around the map, but for the most part, they're around the western parts of the map, where you would expect the Dunedain to have been busy building these fortifications. Now, these forts serve a purpose similar to what you may remember from 4th Age Total War Dominion of Men, where there were several permanent fortification settlements on the map that provided very, very limited building options. In Wainriders, we've expanded the building options somewhat. So, for example, if we can go to this fort's project browser, you can see that there are quite a few buildings you could elect to develop here. Just the first tiers of things like military development, farms, merchants, smiths, roads, and a little bit of land improvement. Now, the precise functions of some of these building options in forts is still being determined. So, for example, will military development actually allow you to train entire units of troops, or will it be more like a retraining option? We're still figuring that out. The main advantage of these fort-type buildings is that they will typically command strategic positions on the map. So for example, this one here commands a crossing along the Great River, as do these other two. Other forts further in the west at one point commanded the north-south road, and so those places are typically worth defending for strategic reasons, not so much for the wealth or the training options that they're going to bring. The third and final settlement type is going to be the minor settlements or camps, and there are only two of these on the entire map. One of them is at Helond. This is, if you know about the lore, presents a unique problem for our time period. We know for about another 100 years or so, at least, there were elves living here. If you know anything about the story of Amroth, for example, I believe that occurred in Third Age 1980, 1981, something along those lines. So what to do with a Gondor, which has smack in the middle of it this community of elves? Well, rather than going with something gamey like elven recruitment, for Gondor, we decided we needed to have this represented in some way, but it's going to be represented in this extremely minor way. It's there, but it's not going to provide you basically any options. There'll be no recruitment here, there will be no construction here, but it does exist. I guess it provides you that nominal income. This is indicated here by the minor settlement icon. So instead of a settlement or a fort, this is a minor settlement. And I do want to stress that this is very different from what you may remember in Fourth Age Total War, or maybe other mods based on Rome, where the first slot is going to be indicating the level of the settlement. This is not the case. This settlement building just indicates what type of settlement the settlement is. Now, in addition to Ed Helon, there is one other settlement that falls under this category of a minor settlement, although we're thinking of it as more of an encampment, I suppose, of the few elves who may remain around Holland. But that does not begin in the possession of any particular faction, so again, it's not one that you're likely to interact with. As you can see from the building browser here, from the project browser for Ed Helon, there would be no options for this one. Now, in addition to just indicating the type of settlement that you have, the settlement building is also there to provide information that is unique to this settlement that it describes. So, for example, if we go back to -Anor and we right-click our settlement building icon, we can see that there is a list of information given here. Now, again, some of the way this is displayed, you may want to consider a work in progress, along with a description and so on. But this is indicating several things about the settlement itself. So this tells you here its provincial attributes. This is a chief province. In other words, this is a place where you can develop everything apart from those things which are mutually exclusive, such as different types of industries, for example. This also indicates to you the type of terrain, and that has to do with how well you can upgrade the roads in the province. You also get an indication of the fertility of the province itself. Here we've got high fertility, as you would imagine, and some important information for the potential for sea trade. Is this a coastal, or is this a province along a deep navigable river? And this is. That indicates that you can build a seaport here. In some other places higher up the Anduin, you could make a river port instead. And again, we talked about those navigable rivers. We've got stretches of the Anduin that are navigable by ship. We've also got the river running itself into the Sea of Rune, and then the Grey Flood. So those three rivers could have river ports instead of seaports. We also, on the settlement information panel, have indications about the types of trade resources you can expect there. So here we've got two listed. Occasionally, there will be just a single trade resource in a province, and some provinces may have as many as 3. All of these trade resources, of course, will allow different building options as different industries become available to make use of those resources. And those industry buildings themselves will offer different bonuses to income or other things. In addition to that, there are a few places around the map that have what we're calling wonders. So if we go over to the settlement of Mornin, for example, we've got here, we know that the Stone of Erech is not too far away. It's in the province of this settlement, and that is indicated here, that this settlement, this province, contains a wonder. Now, these wonders are distinct from the marvels or the types of buildings that you can find in Minas Anor, in Osgiliath, or in Minas Anor or Minas Ithil, for example. Things like the Tower of the Moon, the ruins of the Dome of the Stars, or the King's House, the White Tree of Minas Anor, the Othram, and so on. These types of buildings, for the most part, can be found in or near the settlement itself, whereas wonders, things like the Stone of Erech, can be found more broadly across the map and typically are found at some distance from the settlement. Another example of a wonder would, of course, be the Argonath. And this time they're not located in a settlement, but in a fort, because the fort controls the province that contains the Argonath. So you can see here that they have a wonder which provides unique local and faction-wide benefits, as well as some very rough or expensive terrain, very limited road upgrades in this part of the world. So again, this settlement building is essentially there to provide you with this overall information about the settlement itself. And this, of course, will change depending on the settlement you're looking at. So we could go to a more inland place here, and you can see that we've got some slightly different attributes here. This, of course, is not a chief settlement, but it does have a navigable river. It's got high fertility, gentle terrain, and wine and honey. We can go even further afield, looking at Tarnost. This has a rougher terrain, so roads are going to be costly and more limited. It's got medium fertility. It's got a couple of different trade resources altogether. And checking with Ed Helland here, we can see that there's going to be very, very little going on here. Very rough terrain, but high fertility, so there is potential agriculture to be had in this province. Now, that's all fairly straightforward, but one of the things that is maybe a bit of a departure from mods like 4th Age Total War is the population system. In some ways, the way I've been thinking about it is an alternative to the regional system that existed in Dominion of Men. Dominion of Men, you have these region buildings that indicate broadly, what type of region is this? Is this Gondor? Is this Rovanian? Is this Northern Wilderland? Or whatever. In Wainriders, we don't have regional indicators, but we do have population indicators. Now, again, I should point out that the names for these are currently placeholders. So Gondor Core is just an internal name for the developers team so that we can remind ourselves, okay, this is kind of like the core population of Gondor. There's other names. Gondor Periphery, I believe, is going to be another one. Yes, Gondor Periphery here. And this, again, is a placeholder name. That's not going to be what we finally call this population. But these buildings are intended to represent the dominant population you can find in the province. This is not indicating the only population or the majority even necessarily, but the population that is sort of taking the reins of the region, of the province itself. Ultimately, we're probably going to go with names that are descriptive here, either of the region or of the people. Men of the White Mountains, Men of Arthedain, the Galadrim, Mountain Orcs, Halflings, and so on. So these things will get changed as we get that text in there. Eridan informs me that we have around 44 different types of populations, distinct population types in the mod. So there's going to be quite a lot of different population types here. And these are spread across 8 different races or cultures. And these large building cards are going to be color-coded for each culture or race. So there's going to be a different sort of icon here depending on what you're looking at, what faction you're looking at, and so on. Now, just by clicking on this building here, we can see that this population building is going to have some specific effects on the province. So the dominant population is going to have an impact on the potential population growth, on the public order or the happiness, on the alignment, and also its relationship or its disposition to each faction. So for example, if it's a homeland or if it is further afield. And that in turn, as you might imagine, is going to impact things like public order. The other thing that population does is it naturally represents the types of units that you may have available in the province. Now, this does not mean that if you are playing Gondor and you invade a province in the east, that you're necessarily going to be able to train all Wainrider-style units simply because that's the population type there. However, it does give you a sense that this is the broad type of people that you're probably going to be working with, And in some cases, yes, it will allow you to train different unit types outside of your typical native roster. That is still something that we're developing, the exact local levy-style unit rosters for different regions on the map. That'll be something we go into more detail with as that gets developed out. Now, aside from all of the different population types or the population groups that you can find scattered across the map, these population buildings are going to come in 3 very broad types. So we've got, on the one hand, something like this, which is represented by this filled-in silhouette, and this indicates that we've got essentially a normal level of population. Of course, certain population groups are going to have slightly higher growth rates than others, or lower, but for the most part, you see a filled-in silhouette here. You're dealing with a normal province. You can do the normal types of building and training and retraining and all that sort of thing. However, if we go to the north, just into Kalanardon, and we can take a look at the buildings they have here, we can see that we're looking at more of a faded silhouette. And this is an underpopulated province, as you can see. This is, of course, in keeping with what we know about the region. And so in some places where the population has been historically low, or we can infer that such has been the case, you will find underpopulated provinces. These are places where there is a permanent moderate penalty to population growth. You can still develop the settlement normally. You can build all the stuff you would normally expect, but we're going to get a penalty there. Population growth modifier minus 1.5%. Now in practice, that's going to mean that a place like Eastern Kalanardon here is going to be difficult to grow compared with some of your other provinces across the map. Another place where you can find some underpopulation is south of the Anduin in Harondor. So here we've got another underpopulated province. Again, that's going to give us that minus 1.5% population growth modifier, and it means it's going to be harder to grow this place because, as we know, the region of Harondor was, at this stage at any rate, really not amounting to terribly much, certainly taking very little part in the action. So again, we've got the normal type of population. We've got underpopulated in a couple of regions around Gondor, but to show the third type, a depopulated region, we're going to have to switch campaigns for a moment. Yes, so let's check out Arnor here. In Fornost, your capital, you've got typical population levels here, as you would imagine. Of course, this is a regular settlement, and then you've got a couple of forts as well, function as those permanent forts, both with normal population, but let's look at Numinas, and here, yeah, we've got depopulation here. This is just an outline, not even the faded silhouette that was indicating underpopulation. This is straight up depopulation. Now, taking a look at the larger panel here will indicate to you that instead of a negative 1.5 penalty, like you would see with an underpopulated province, here we're looking at minus 3%. But more than that, in a province that is depopulated, you will actually need to instigate a migration process before you can do anything with it. So in order for you to build anything, in order for you to really get use out of this province, you're going to have to begin a resettlement, essentially. This is something that you're going to have to do in a few places around the map, but it's a little more prevalent up around Eriador for obvious reasons. This entire region is often portrayed as being very, very low in terms of population. And so it's going to require a lot more work for you to get full use out of these places. Now, the details of that migration process are something that we'll have to go into in another video. But for now, the main thing to know is that that allows you to get rid of some of those penalties. It allows you to develop your province, and it also allows you to potentially change the population group, the dominant population of that province. And so with those pieces of information together, we might take a closer look at a faction like Arnor, because at first glance you might see something like 8 settlements here and think, well, okay, this is not going to be too bad. I've only got the one enemy to my northeast, and I've got allies to my back, and pretty much nobody to my south. What's to prevent me from training up a bunch of units and just marching against the Witch King? Well, partly it's going to be the fact that you've got some of these provinces that are not going to do you a lot of good. Numinas is, of course, going to be one of them, although it does have an Arthedain population type. it is not developed. It is depopulated, so you'll have to put some work in before this is going to be useful, just like it seems to have been the case during the wars in the north that we read about prior to the Wainrider period, and even near the end of that Wainrider period. You've also got a couple of forts here, which are going to offer very limited training, if any training at all, possibly only just retraining of units. So in terms of settlements that are normal, that allow you a population that you'd be able to work with, we've got Fornost, your capital. We've got what would later develop into the settlement of Bree. And then we've got what would later be known as Sarn Fort, essentially. All of these, though, you can expect are going to have relatively low populations to start. But the other settlements, in Numinas, and even, what would later be the Shire, although it does have normal population, this is hobbits, this is halflings here, and so this is not something that you're going to be able to make use of, really. Over here, of course, this is going to be a fort, as you can tell from this icon. So these pieces of information together, it suddenly becomes a lot more clear that you've really only got 3 settlements to work with, initially at any rate, in terms of training. Now, this has been a rather Dunedain-centric video, but these are not the only regions on the map where you're going to have to worry about things like population levels and settlement types. So in Rovanion, in Tharbad, a bit further down here, in Cardolan, these are all places where you can imagine low population growths having an impact on the gameplay, not just of factions like Arnor and Gondor, but factions like the Black Forest tribes, factions like the Chiefdom of the Angren, factions like Angmar, factions like the Wainriders in Rovanion, who now have to deal with this low population that they have in some extent themselves caused. So while these 2 building types may, on the one hand, seem rather static, on the other, they do convey some very useful information and help you sort of plan how your campaign is going to progress. So I hope you enjoyed this quick look at a couple of the most basic building types you can see and learn from in your building panel for Wainriders. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. And in future videos, we are going to expand our look at some of these other building types and let you know what you can get out of them, what you can do, how you can develop them, and more information like that. Thanks very much for joining me for this one, and I hope you'll stick around for the next video. Until then, everybody, take care.